abbiamo eccezionalmente Daniel Piker, ovviamente parlerà esclusivamente inglese doc, spero sia chiaro. E non so se tutti lo conoscono, Daniel lavora a stretto contatto con McNeil, è uno dei loro sviluppatori più creativi, perché in realtà in McNeil ci sono diversi, diciamo, livelli o diversi ruoli, e la cosa che non sempre viene percepita è che in McNeil c'è tantissima ricerca e sviluppo. Poi che fine faccia questa cosa non sempre arriva fino in fondo, ci sono cose che nascono come i vincoli agli sketch, i constraint, they started and ci sono cose bellissime che poi a un certo punto si fermano per mille motivi, però ci sono anche cose che arrivano in fondo. Per esempio in Grasshopper c'è Kangaroo, sempre ideato e sviluppato da Daniel, è nato come un po' un esercizio e poi invece nella versione 2 è diventato uno strumento completamente integrato e estremamente utile e performante. Ieri c'è stato un workshop abbastanza esaustivo su questo, qualcuno ha avuto la fortuna di seguire, e sicuramente molto interessante. Come dicevo, Daniel è un pioniere e non fa lo sviluppo, quello che si chiama bug fixes, o non credo ne faccia granché, ma si occupa di fare cose nuove, di provare, sperimentare. Una delle cose nuove si chiama Isopod, che è l'ultima introduzione, circa un anno fa, è stato introdotto così, è stato buttato lì. E Isopod si occupa di quel passaggio che appunto vi ho raccontato fra la voxelizzazione del modello e l'introduce dei concetti di SDF, quindi di modellazione per Signed Distance Field. Credo che lui sia il più in grado, il più capace nel raccontarvi cosa sta facendo e come lo sta facendo, quindi...
So yeah, I'm Daniel Piker, and first to introduce myself a little bit. Years ago I started working in the Arab Advanced Geometry Unit. For the last 12 years or so I've been at Foster & Partners in the specialist modeling group doing form finding and optimization, and I'm also the developer of the Kangaroo plugin for more than 10 years now, and now also working for McNeil. So Kangaroo is, I'll just briefly talk about some of the other stuff I've done. So Kangaroo is a form-finding plugin for tensile, inflatable, various sorts of optimization. I also developed the multi-pipe tool in Rhino and Grasshopper.
We love it. Thank you.
So this is the mesh cage morph, so a tool for deforming geometry given a mesh as a cage. So as you change the vertices of the mesh, whatever's inside it gets transformed along with it. Also the tri-remesh function for generating isotropic meshes. Preserving sharp features.
Usate il tri-remesh.
But today I'm mainly here to talk about Isopod and scalar fields and implicit surfaces. So I'll start. I know there's already been quite a lot of talk about implicits, but I'll give my take on it and try and give hopefully a clear kind of definition of some of the terms. I'll start by talking about what a scalar field is in 2D. So for every point in a 2D space, we can have a value, and one way we could visualize that is with a color map. Another way we could visualize it for a 2D field is with a height map. So we can, in 3D, we can take that 2D scalar field and use that value to control the height of a surface. When we have that surface, we can intersect it with a plane, and then we get a contour curve. Now, what do we get if we try and do the same thing in 3D? Well, again, we want a number for every point in space. This gets a little bit harder to visualize in 3D because obviously in 3D things are blocking the things behind, but we can sort of picture our scalar fields with color values still. Picturing it, obviously for 2D scalar field you have to go to 3D. For a 3D scalar field you have to go to 4D. So kind of hard to picture, but we can code it fine. And we can still do that intersection. And we end up, instead of a contour curve, we end up with a contour surface. So a isosurface. And that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about.
Wait. Okay. My head exploded.
Okay.
But yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
It's
Ci siamo così. Can you give me 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Ok. Velocemente, partiamo da un punto, questo punto può avere un valore, questo valore può rappresentare la terza coordinata se parliamo di spazio piano e quindi possiamo generare un contorno di questa ipotetica superficie. La stessa cosa si può fare a partire da una immagine, da una serie di punti nello spazio. È che se io ho i punti nello spazio sono già tridimensionali e quindi devo lavorare, come diceva Ritorno al futuro, quadridimensionalmente. Quindi devo aggiungere la quarta dimensione. Come faccio umano? Non lo so, ma matematicamente questo è un processo che si può fare tranquillamente. Quindi si passa al processo che avete visto in 2D, lo si fa in 4D, ottenendo come risultato una dimensione in meno e quindi quella che si chiama isosuperficie. A voi non interessa come si fa, a voi interessa il risultato. Quindi.
Okay. So just to compare for a moment to other 3 other modeling paradigms, one you're all familiar with is Nurbs. Nurbs is obviously at the heart of Rhino, and one of the challenges with Nurbs is obviously it's made up of patches and we have to define that patch layout, and if we make changes to the model, particularly fillets with large radius, you can imagine if I try and increase the radius of those fillets, at some point they collide, it brings new challenges. Meshes, we can do booleans and join them, but we have a lot of challenges if we want to then further process them. It's a very destructive workflow, and things like smoothing, I mean, there are ways of doing it, but it presents its own challenges. Sub-D makes things like smoothing much easier, but you still have to define that quad patch layout. Implicits, so here to show a little bit. So just some very simple modeling, in this case with SDFs, and I'll talk about SDFs versus implicits later. But you can see that making very large changes, dragging things around, smoothing with large radius, it all behaves kind of like clay or liquid. We can keep things smooth, and then at the end we can convert it to other forms if we want to use it for other things in Rhino.
Yeah, so someone patented the liquid modeling, no?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yeah. Liquid modeling.
So some of the kind of classic things we can do with implicits, blending, booleans, triply periodic minimal surfaces, of course. So this plugin, Isopod, that I've been developing is bringing some of these things into Grasshopper and Rhino. It's a free plugin, anyone can download it and run it. This been for, I think around a year now it's been out, and I've gradually improving and experimenting with it. Talked about booleans. You can also add various types of fillets and slots and grooves and chamfers. So why implicit? This thing of not worrying about patch layout is a big one. As a very simple, lightweight definition, the actual functions defining these fields are very simple, very short. Some things become much easier. Some things become harder, so you have trade-offs, as always. I don't think there's ever going to be one single geometry representation which is perfect for everything. And most excitingly for me, my motivation for getting this is that it enables modeling some new types of surfaces which are pretty much impossible to do any other way. So I talked about lattice structures, infills. That's not really been sort of my main focus with it, but you can do these sorts of lightweighting structures, and in this case showing how you can preserve also the sharp features on the outside. Fields get really fun because you can feed fields with other fields. So in this case, that gradient you see along the bottom is one scalar field, and that scalar field is controlling the volume fraction of this gyroid structure. Or we could take that scalar field, in this case from an image, or from a, you're familiar with this stuff by this point, I think. We can use fields for blending other fields. So in this case, we've got gyroid in some region, a P surface in some, a D surface in another, and then we've defined a blending function based off proximity to some geometry in this case. Setting heights from a series of points and having a scalar field controlling the smoothness of the blending. We can map fields with other fields, so in this case using a complex map to morph a triply periodic surface. Some of the more experimental stuff, one of the things I was really interested in doing was dividing surfaces. So this is a smooth, given two graphs, you can find a surface separating the two of them. Of course, it plays nicely with Kangaroo, so you can feed your scalar fields into Kangaroo. So here we've got a scalar function for the two blobs, and then that scalar function is going into Kangaroo, which is pulling particles to the isosurface, and then feeding that in again and generating another smooth surface from that. Something I got quite excited about was spinodoids. So this is a way of building up, we can build up some of these lattice type structures, but without being constrained to periodicity. And the way it works is we have a small local wave-like region in 3D, and we can give that an orientation and a wavelength, and we can sum up lots of these, and that allows us to control anisotropy. So in this case, on the left, you've got a very plate-like structure. On the right, a more rod-like structure, which you can easily control with other fields. And this, so either 2D or fully 3D.
Ok, non credo ci sia bisogno di nessuna traduzione, a parte, vabbè, magari vi siete persi qualche parola, ma le immagini sono estremamente esplicative. Una delle parole che dovete segnarvi è spinodoide, spinodoide, questo aggeggio, che è una formulina matematica, niente di che, io non la saprei leggere, però fa quelle cose lì. E ha delle proprietà interessanti, cioè al contrario delle TPMS di cui abbiamo tanto parlato, al contrario, non è periodica e quindi è diversa in ogni punto, invece di essere uguale è diversa, è una serie di proprietà connesse. Thank you.
So as it's in Grasshopper, and a really important thing for me was that it's not just presenting you with a set of predefined fields which you combine, but you can completely customize it. So any function you write in C# or in Python, you just need to define a function which, given a point in space, returns a value. And there's no limitations on what code goes within that function, which is a bit unusual compared to some other platforms. Typically, you want to sort of limit and constrain a bit, but here it's quite free. This was just an experiment. It surprised me some of the kind of things that fields ended up being useful for, generating a wood texture based on a scalar field.
Because wood texture are actually kind of...
Yeah, there are many things which can be sort of, it's quite a shift in mindset, but once you start thinking that way, several things start...
There's a lot of natural system that grows, so it's kind of a way to represent it.
Yeah. So a lot of mathematical experiments. These are quaternion Euler sets. So these scripting these, and you might have seen these rendered, but this is actually generating a solid which we could slice and 3D print. So we are actually getting solid geometry out of it at the end. Another thing that they turn out to be useful for is completing surfaces with holes in. So this is a definition of a type of scalar field called the winding number of a mesh. So from that, so the only input to this was that mesh with all the holes, and basically by summing up a function over all of the triangles, we can get a scalar field whose level set approximates the missing regions. So we've talked a lot about implicits, SDFs, and I think the distinction is not always completely clear. So SDFs are a subset. So you have the whole world of implicits, which is any way of defining a scalar field at every point in space. Side distance functions are specifically those which encode the distance to an object, and typically positive to the outside, negative to the inside. But the value is always, for a true SDF, as exactly the distance. A lot of the time, we also, it tends to get used a bit loosely, so a lot of software works with distance-like functions. Often you have a sort of bound, a Lipschitz bound, which is a limit on how quickly the value can change. So with a true distance field, you know if you go 1 unit, the scalar value doesn't change more than 1 unit. But you can also have some other finite bound, so at least you know it's within limits. But implicit functions in general don't give us any of those limits. So here we've got a true SDF on the left. That top left one, surprisingly, is not an SDF. It might look like it, but if you actually look at the inside, those spacings are not the distance to the boundary. And even simple operations like Booleans actually break the SDF property. So again, subtraction. But you can define other types of implicits which are very far from SDFs. So this one in the top right, although it has a level set of 0, which gives us that curve, and it has a clearly defined inside and outside, those curves, so those contour curves you can see, in some places they're very, very close together, in some places they're far apart. And Isopod, the aim was to make something that can deal with even these types of fields. SDF does have some advantages. Things like offsetting. If you want to thicken a surface, if it's a true SDF, you know exactly how thick it's going to be. If you do want to render it directly, there's been some talk of direct rendering, so scalar fields, you can actually ray march them, meaning for every pixel on the screen, you shoot a ray and find where it hits your surface, and that becomes much easier to do if you have signed distance fields. And potentially there are faster ways of meshing them, but this all comes at a cost of greatly constraining the types of geometry you can work with. And I was particularly interested in using...
Can I?
Yeah.
Can I? Give me a second.
Yeah, sorry.
Secondo me, appunto, qui farei un piccolo focus. Appunto io ho accennato il ray marching perché è uno dei possibili sistemi, quello diciamo un pochino più comune, per trasformare tutta questa matematica in qualcosa di poi visualizzato. Per visualizzare al momento c'è ancora bisogno delle mesh e quindi bisogna fare questo passaggio. Il vantaggio è sempre quello di avere una risoluzione controllabile, quindi io posso visualizzarlo velocemente con una mesh scadente e poi dire ok, adesso mi fai la mesh super definita e sono a posto. L'altro vantaggio interessante è che definendo una distanza da un campo, è scritto lì piccolino, ma abbiamo un oggetto chiuso con uno spessore costante, che è effettivamente costante, quindi non è dato dall'approssimazione di una superficie iniziale su una superficie finale, ma è effettivamente un offset costante. È chiaro che per alcuni processi di costruzione è un vantaggio non indifferente. Poi ho un tipo di geometria che segue certe regole, quindi ci sono vantaggi e svantaggi, ma da quel punto di vista, per esempio, le SDF portano velocemente a strutture stampabili in 3D, per esempio, anche facilmente. E poi appunto ci sono vari sistemi che si possono implementare per accelerare la visualizzazione. NTOP, come dicevo, è già molto avanti su questi studi, ma sono tutte informazioni che arrivano comunque dall'università e che sono aperte, che sono accessibili, e questa è una cosa molto bella.
Thanks.
Some of these packages have been mentioned already, but so like the top row is more on the industrial side. The bottom 6 are much more in the sort of designer modeling. And one thing that I think is just interesting about these tools is like you might notice, particularly with the SDF-based sort of more consumer-oriented modeling stuff, that things tend to have a certain cartoony look, and that is a direct result of limiting to SDFs, because you have a very limited set of primitives like spheres and capsules and boxes, and you can do smooth blends between them, which lends itself very much to certain types of modeling.
Sì, riprendo ancora il concetto. È interessante vedere come appunto i software più semplici, più rivolti verso agli utenti comuni, riducendo il set di funzioni alle sole SDF, producono dei risultati che sono molto più cartoon che non altro. Questo è un po' il limite. Ovviamente definire forme complesse richiede matematiche complesse che ad oggi non vale la pena arrivare a definire, però da designer sappiamo che a volte abbiamo bisogno di fare il cubo spigoloso, ma a volte abbiamo bisogno di fare anche il pupazzetto, e quindi in quel caso c'è uno strumento che ci aiuta.
Okay. So one of my motivations, like I actually started working on these tools several years ago for myself. It was something I wanted to be able to model, and I couldn't find existing tools that would do it. And it's only more recently that I decided to turn it into something for the general users. And this was a function called the solid angle of a space curve in this case, as a way of generating these particular mathematical surfaces I was interested in. So this was, as I say, one of my original motivations for creating it. And this has developed these types of surfaces where you have a filament, a curve, or a circle. You can generate these surfaces with very nice continuity, passing exactly through these curves. Some of these so there is actually, in Isopod there are scalar fields, but there are also complex fields, meaning complex number fields. So where it has a real part and an imaginary part, and that's used for the creation of some of these surfaces. Back to a little bit of just morphing, in this case with these complex fields I mentioned, for morphing geometry to solids. And this, so I will mention the mesher is an approach I came up with. It's not like just a standard marching cubes. I developed a new way of meshing these fields for this software. We can use it for some types of blending. So in this case, this is an implicit surface blending between a few different profiles. We can cut surfaces with fields. So in this case, two different surfaces, one cut with the implicit function of the other. And we can also generate implicits interpolating through given points with tangency, in this case. So I've been having a lot of fun, basically. I think there's a lot of potential for interesting ways of sculpting with these. I mentioned these complex valued functions. So this is a function called the lemniscate sign. It's a special case of Jacobi elliptic functions. And the reason I was interested in this is like something I've wanted to do for more than a decade. Like I had the idea maybe this was possible back as a student, and then eventually put the tools together to model this. So we take the log of that function, gives us this scalar field on the left, which is a 2D scalar field. We take 3 copies of that in 3 different axes, offset, so the axes form this spatial weave, and that gives us this. So this is a new family of triply periodic surfaces. It's not one of the known ones, and so it passes through these lines and it deforms continuously, so it's a cyclic deformation, so you can go from one surface all the way around to the other. So one thing that came as a surprise to me after modeling this is that, so that surface, I took the imaginary part of the complex function, but if you take the real part, you get the gyroid. So actually this complex function has two parts. One is the gyroid, and the other is a sort of cousin to the gyroid, which is this new family. And so this is exactly the kind of thing I made it for, to be able to explore these kind of things more easily.
Right.
Okay, how are we doing? A little bit about voxels versus fields, because I think this is also sometimes a matter of, is not always clear. Voxels, volume pixels, ultimately they are a sampling. So you have values at a regular grid of points in space, whereas a functional form of a field is your recipe for getting that value. So if you want to evaluate, you don't need to only evaluate it on the grid points. You can actually search for the value at anywhere in between, and that means it's lossless. So when you transform one function with another function, you don't lose resolution, you don't lose smoothness or sharpness, whereas with voxels you always have to interpolate the values that you have. Voxels also have much higher storage requirements, whereas fields, because it's just the recipe, much lighter. The positive side of voxels is that certain things that become much faster to do in voxel space because you've got that pre-calculated information. One of the things you can do with fields rather than meshing them on a grid, this is an example of essentially shrink wrapping an implicit. So that blob is defined implicitly, then you've got a box surrounding it, and I'm root finding the function between the box and a point in the center, and that will pull a grid of predefined topology onto the surface. We can also evaluate a 3D field at planes in space. And this is interesting, so this is something I'm working on now for future. We can, rather than always having to mesh the implicit, generate a very dense triangle mesh, sometimes it can be useful to evaluate at lots of slices, and sometimes you can send those slices directly to additive manufacturing processes. Kind of the ideal where you really want to get to when transferring fields is to send the recipe, not the data, because it's much more lightweight. Again, it's lossless. So this is where I ultimately want to get to, and there are some interchange formats. The 3MF format is supporting functional representations which you can transfer between software. The challenge with that, though, is that, like with SDFs or things you can very much, like you typically have to limit the types of functions you can use for that. So the existing format, which supports functional representation interchange, works with a fairly tightly constrained set of mathematical methods. So some of the surfaces that I was showing before wouldn't really be possible to define in a way compatible with that. But yeah, I'm always keen to hear feedback. You can try it out. It's free. Everyone with Rhino can download it in Package Manager. Just search for Isopod. Or on the forum, there is a very long post with dozens, hundreds of examples, and some people already creating their own custom fields in there. Yeah, check it out.
Io vi suggerirei una cosa, visto che stamattina abbiamo parlato di AI, vi scaricate Isopod. Isopod in realtà ha bisogno di una formuletta matematica, quindi vi fate scrivere del chat GPT che cavolo ha bisogno e senza fare nulla vi trovate il risultato che poi potete controllare con Grasshopper. Se non funziona il primo colpo funziona il secondo, quindi secondo me bisogna anche connettere. No, I was suggesting to use ChatGPT to write the code for making Isopod work in a custom way. Should work.
Yeah, I guess
Maybe
if
not
you,
the first
if you
try,
train it on enough data.
yeah,
maybe,
the second, maybe the third.
Yeah.
It's gonna try. There's also this new function you can send the code information and he will work for. So
Yeah. Potentially, so I'll end with a look to the future. So these are a few things that I hope maybe to get to in the future development of this. I talked about the advantages of voxels. I think it's challenging combining the functional and the voxel representation, but if we can make that work, it's potentially has some big advantages. It is being integrated into Grasshopper 2. That's definitely happening, and there are some Grasshopper 2 has its own existing field type, so it won't need to be a custom thing as it was for Grasshopper 1. Sharp feature preservation, I'm trying to... So there are some meshing techniques which will give you sharp corners and edges. Always trying to make it faster. And always, the others I mentioned.
Always. Make it faster.
Yeah.
Making it faster.
But yeah, the aim is not to directly replicate any of the other tools. The aim is to try and do something new. And but faster is always good.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.